as most people imagine it, didn't start in Europe. It didn't begin with factories or flags or nation states. On the Great Plains, war was older than all of that. Among the Apsalaka, what most people today will call the Crow, war wasn't about territory on a map. It was about movement, survival, reputation, and above all, courage. The plains weren't empty. They were contested. To the east, the Sioux. To the south, the Cheyenne and Arapaho. To the north, the Blackfeet. All of them moving, all of them adapting, all of them fighting for the same thing. Horses, buffalo, and the freedom to move. And the Crow were good at it. Not because they were bigger, not because they had better weapons, but because they understood something. Something most armies wouldn't figure out until much later. Speed matters. Information matters. And knowing the land, that matters more than anything. War parties moved fast. They struck at night, hit supply, not just soldiers. They weren't trying to wipe out an enemy. They were trying to outmaneuver them, outthink them, and outlive them. And leadership wasn't given. It was proven. Men like Pliny Coops understood that. Before he ever became a chief, he was a warrior. Before he ever negotiated with presidents, he had already proven himself in a world where speeches didn't matter. Only actions did. Because among the Crow, you didn't become a leader by being appointed. You became a leader by doing what others wouldn't, and living through it. War on the plains wasn't measured the way most people think. It wasn't about body counts. It wasn't about who could destroy the most. Among the Crow, war was about something harder to measure. Nerve. Anyone could pull a trigger. But to ride straight at an enemy, to close the distance, and touch him, and then turn around and ride away, that took something else. They called it counting coup. To touch an enemy in battle with your hand or a coup stick, and then live to tell about it. Not killing him, not even trying to, just proving that you could have. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. Because the closer you got, the greater the risk. And the greater the risk, the greater the honor. But counting coup was only part of it. A warrior's reputation wasn't built on one act. It was built on a pattern, a record, a life lived in a certain way. To be recognized as a war leader, a man had to prove himself in battle, again and again. Touch the enemy without killing him. Take an enemy's weapon, lead men into danger and bring them back, and take something from the enemy, even from the center of his strength. Not assigned, not ordered, earned. Do all of that in battle, and you weren't just a warrior. You were a war chief. And on the plains, that meant something. Because these weren't symbolic acts. They required speed, timing, awareness, and the ability to move through danger and come back. It wasn't about surviving battle. It was about mastering it. But by the 20th century, no one was doing this anymore. There were no war parties. No horses still. That world was gone. Or at least it was supposed to be. By the early 1900s, the plains had changed. The buffalo were gone. The open range, fenced in. And the Crow, like so many others, were now living on reservations. The old wars had ended, not because anyone had won, but because the world they fought in no longer existed. In its place was something new. A country, an army, a different kind of war. One fought with uniforms, orders, and machines. Young men who just a generation earlier might have ridden out on a war party were now being trained to march in formation, to take commands, to fight not for their own people, but for a nation. And when war came again, this time on a global scale, they answered the call. just like they had before. Even though they hadn't even been recognized as citizens of the country they were fighting for. They crossed oceans. They fought in places their ancestors had never seen or heard of, against enemies they had never known. And they fought well. Because even though the world had changed, some things hadn't. Discipline, awareness, courage under pressure. The same qualities that had defined a warrior on the plains still mattered, just in a different form. And for one man, those two worlds didn't just overlap, they collided. Because while everyone else was fighting a modern war, he was finishing something much older. By the time World War II began, the world of the war chief was long gone. There were no war parties, no enemy camps waiting in the dark, no horses to steal. And the men who might have followed that path were living very different lives. Men like Joe Medicine Crow. Joe was born on the Crow Reservation near Lodge Grass, Montana in 1913. He came from a warrior family.
My grandfather trained me to be a warrior. The Crow Indians were so-called warlike. They're militaristic from way back.
Men and his family had been there. At the Battle of Little Bighorn. They had seen it, lived it. He grew up around those stories. But that wasn't the path that he was on. He was in college, the first of his tribe to go. He was studying anthropology, the study of cultures, traditions, the past, studying cultures like his own as if they were already gone. He knew the stories, he just didn't know that he was about to become one. He wasn't trying to honor a tradition, he wasn't trying to prove a point. He was just trying to survive. But survival ended up meaning something else. And then, war found him anyway. He was drafted into the United States Army and sent overseas. Dropped into a conflict that looked nothing like the ones his ancestors had fought. Different weapons, different rules, a different world. Because the war he was heading into wasn't like the ones his people remembered. On the plains, there were no clear good guys or bad guys. Just people trying to survive. But in Europe, facing what Nazi Germany had become, for maybe the first time, the lines didn't feel so blurred. But not entirely. Because whether anyone realized it or not, the old standards still existed. Unspoken, unwritten, and waiting. And he didn't go into it blindly. Before battle, he painted his arms red, and he placed a yellow eagle feather in his helmet. Not decoration, not superstition. A signal that he understood exactly what he was stepping into. First, he led a war party. Not across the plains, but through a wall of artillery fire. 7 men, carrying explosives, moving forward while everything around them was coming apart. The target? German positions along the Siegfried line. No cavalry charge, no open ground, just timing, nerve, and the decision to keep moving forward. He got them there, set the charges, and brought them back. Mission complete. The second and third almost happened at the same time. While taking a German-held village, he turned a corner and came face to face with an SS soldier. With no time to think or decide, he moved. He struck him, and in the same motion, he took his rifle. Only later did it register what he had done. Without planning it, he had taken an enemy's weapon and counted coup. Without really realizing it or trying, Joe had achieved 3 of the 4 actions required to become a war chief. But by 1945, you were very unlikely to find a horse in a field of battle. There were no war ponies, no mounted charges, just trucks, tanks, and steel. The horse was gone from the battlefield. But then, His patrol had been given orders to attack a cabin held by German soldiers. As they moved in, Joe saw something unexpected. Around 50 horses, pinned up in a corral. He went to his commanding officer and he asked for 5 minutes. The attack was delayed. Instead of charging the cabin, Joe went straight for the horses. He cut them loose, mounted one, and led the herd out. Riding across the German countryside, he began to sing a traditional Crow honor song. 4 deeds, completed in a war that wasn't supposed to allow them, in a world that had supposedly left them behind. And when it was over, he wasn't just a soldier. By the standards of his people, he had done everything required. The old way in a modern war. Because for him, it wasn't history, it was memory. History will tell you that by World War II, the old ways of war were gone. That cavalry was obsolete. That counting Coup belonged to another time. But history doesn't always end cleanly. Sometimes it overlaps. And for one moment, on a battlefield in Germany, the old world and the new were the same thing. Joe Medicine Crow didn't just survive the war. He lived to be 102 years old. Long enough to tell the story himself. Not as a myth, not as a legend, but as history. He became a respected historian and author, preserving the stories of the Crow. And in 2009, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Because somewhere between the Great Plains and Nazi Germany, a Crow war chief proved that some traditions don't disappear. They adapt. If you're still here, thank you. I really enjoy researching and telling these stories, and I hope you're enjoying hearing them. I've got lots more stories like this that are history books left out. So like, subscribe, and share, and I hope to see you back next week. And welcome to the Underground Syllabus.